and welcome to Capitol Journal. I'm John Beans.
And I'm Lori Cummings. This week is spring break for the legislature, so we have special guests each night of the week.
Joining us tonight is Bill Armistead. Mr. Armistead is the newly elected chair for the Republican Party. Thanks and welcome to Capitol Journal.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
First off, what are your goals as chair of the Republican Party?
Well, obviously the first thing I want to do is get the party united, because if we're united, we can do more than if we're divided. And you know, last year we had a primary for governor, and a lot of people on different campaigns, and so now we got to make sure everyone's on the same team. So first and foremost is unite the party, and then make sure now that we're the majority in the Alabama legislature that we deliver on the promises we made during the campaign.
I know that you were in the Senate for a long time, and now you're the head of the Republican Party, the chair. How does it feel? I know you've been here at the State House. How does it feel now to be the majority instead of the minority?
Well, it feels real good. It feels better. It feels better to be in the majority than the minority, I can tell you that. But it's exciting that we now have an agenda that we can put forth. We have great leaders in the House and the Senate. Speaker Hubbard, Senate Pro Tem Marsh, they're doing a great job. They have an agenda. They're putting it out there, and they're taking it one at a time, and they're going to be very successful in delivering what the Alabama voters said they wanted back in November.
Now, you talked about uniting the party.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you're in the majority, do you have a lot more divergent voices within there that you have to also listen to and try to bring together and have maybe even more ideas about what you want to do?
Well, John, you're right. I mean, we are the majority, so you're going to have more people that you got to work with. That means you're going to have more and different ideas. So it's a lot easier. Some people say it's like herding cats, but it's a little bit better than that. But you do have, you know, all the state constitutional offices are Republican now except two, and all the legislative bodies, the House and the Senate, are both majority Republican. And so we have a strong majority all over the state of Alabama, with one exception, and that'll be what we can talk about in a minute. That's the courthouses. But I think since we are in the majority, we have to prove that we can lead. We have to prove that we can do those things that we said we would do during the campaign. So accountability is the main thrust of what I'll be focusing on during this legislative session and going forward.
You know, you talked about bringing the party together, and I've interviewed a lot of people, and they said that there's a split, that there's some that are Bentley people and some that are Riley people, and I'm sure you've heard that.
Sure.
How do you feel about that? Is there a split, and is that who you're trying to bring together? But also, I read about the rhinos, the Democrats that have changed to Republicans, so you kind of have a three-thing going on here. How do you bring that all together and make sense of it?
Well, first of all, many of us supported different candidates for governor, and that's over with. That was in 2010. We're now moving on to 2012. That's the next campaign year. So what I want to get people to do is focus on the future and not look back into the past. You know, we have supported different candidates all along the way, but we've never been in the majority and done that. So our party is larger now. We have to really focus on bringing the party together through focusing on the things that can unite us. Now, next year, we have the presidential election. We feel very good about Alabama being strongly Republican, but we need to have everyone get together and support the candidate of their choice in the presidential election. That's going to mix people up in different camps. That's going to sort of break down the barriers that may have existed last year, because folks are going to make their pick based on different things for president than they did for governor. So I think that's one thing that will bring us together. And we'll just focus on those things that we're targeting for the future.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the fact that at the courthouse, on the local level, still majority Democrat.
Right.
What are you doing on that level to help grow the Republican Party?
Well, first of all, when we look at next year, we're looking at two races in each county that are up in every county. That's the probate judge and the circuit clerk. Now, the Democrats are probably watching this tonight and knowing that I'm about to tell them some of the
You're about to give them the inside information.
I'm going to give them inside, but just so you know, there are 23 Republican probate judges out of 68. There are two in Jefferson County, so there are 68. We only have 23 of those, and about half of those were appointed by Governor Riley. So we have a lot of work to do there, but I think that we can make tremendous gains at the courthouse with the probate judges. Then with the circuit clerks, we only have 17 out of 67, so there are 50 Democrat circuit clerks. I'll be focusing on those counties that we know that we have elected Republicans in before, and they've typically voted statewide elections for Republicans, and those will be the counties that I'll look at. So if the Democrats are watching, what they can know is if they voted Republican in the past few years, we're coming after them.
You're on your way.
I'm on my way.
I had read an article the other day that said that in Alabama, Democrats are very conservative, and there's not a lot of difference between a Democrat and a Republican in Alabama. Is that true?
Well, that's not true any longer. I guess maybe 20 years ago it was true, but most of the conservative Democrats have come over. They've switched parties. There are very few Democrats left that would be, I would say, conservative. So there's a big difference. If you're part of the Democrat Party, you're part of the party from the top to the down, to the top to the bottom, I should say. So we feel very strongly that we represent the values of everyone in Alabama, from the top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket. And next year we'll be explaining that very clearly as to whose ticket different candidates own. I think our party represents the values of most Alabamians.
As chair of the party, what do you see your role as chair? What are the things that you have to do, that you have to focus on, the tasks that you're responsible for?
Well, if you get down to the nitty-gritty, we obviously have to raise money to be successful in campaigns. So one of the first things right after uniting the party is raising money, recruiting candidates, and getting them elected. We have a strong team in place to do that. So we'll be having fundraisers to make sure we have the kind of resources that we can use to help in these races. Now, next year, there are 2 races up statewide that we don't hold, and that would be the President of the Alabama Public Service Commission and Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. Those will be targets. We will run hard for those 2 races, and I think we'll be successful. Beyond that, we're going to be looking at the other races that we can target that will show that we're different from the top to the bottom of our ticket.
I know, I always found it fascinating that we would have a Republican governor and then the House and Senate was majority Democrat. And like you said, we'd have Republicans and then also the local would be Democrats.
Right.
So it's kind of been a mesh for a while. And now it's changed. Why do you think it's changed? And what do you think the Republicans are bringing to the table that's made people change?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, the Democrats have done a lot to help us. They've moved further and further to the left. Republicans have sort of stayed consistently as the mainstream conservative fiscal and social issues. So I think the Democrat Party's left the Alabama Democrats by and large. They've left them because they've gone far off to the left, and most Alabamians are either independents or Republican. There's still enough Democrats that they can still be called an active party in Alabama, but we don't take anything for granted. We know that they're going to be aggressive in the future campaigns, particularly on the local level. That's sort of the last front that we have to conquer. And so sort of started at the top with presidential elections and the congressional elections, then statewide elections, and now the legislative elections, and now we're down to where the rubber meets the road, and that's the courthouses.
What are going to be some things that you're going to be doing as you look at the party on the local level, but also to build the party as well?
Well, what we're going to look at, as I said, those 2 races in each of the counties, and the way we're going to look at that is we're going to look at the counties that have had a tendency to go with us on those races in the past. And then we'll be actively recruiting candidates to run. Now, there may be a few conservative Democrats left out there, and if they are, this will be a good time to put in their application to become a Republican, because we're targeting these counties very closely. And if there are Democrats, conservative Democrats, who would like to become Republicans, then the county Democrats ought to contact the county Republican Party and say, we have an interest in talking to you or interest in speaking. At that point, we would entertain getting them into our party and switching and help them run for office. Now, one thing that I won't do in the future is if a local Democrat, let's say is a probate judge, wants to switch parties and become a Republican, they need not call me first. They need to call the county chairman first and talk to the Republican county chairman, say, I have an interest, here's what I would do, and then the county chairman brings that to the state party, and we discuss that at that point. I'm not going to go around the Republican county chairman. I'm not going to go over them. I'm going to, if a Democrat comes to me in their local race, I'm going to go to their county chairman and introduce them if they don't know one another and say, this is who you need to be talking to.
How do you feel about someone who is a Democrat who says they want to become a Republican? Do you worry that longtime Republicans will not like somebody switching, that they'll see, oh, is that person switching because they just want to stay in a particular office?
Well, the great thing about primaries is that you get to make that decision as to who you want to support. Now, there are some Democrats that have switched recently that are not as conservative or Republican as some of our people would like. But, you know, they can switch, and then when the primary comes, the voters will determine if they're the right ones to be running. There are certain criteria that the Republican Party will be establishing as far as party switchers are concerned, though. As chairman, 2 weeks ago, I announced a committee that I was forming to study party switchers and study crossover voting, or Democrats coming in the Republican primary, that kind of thing, which some folks say happened in the last election. So I put together a committee that's going to study that and make recommendations to the party. Do we need to have party registration, for example? Now, some states have party registration, either Republican or Democrat. And once you register, that's the primary you vote in, and you don't go back and forth. You know, that's a lot to be said for that, but there's a lot of problems that are created when you have party registration. The biggest problem is your independents there. They're not registered to either party, and so if they're not registered, they don't vote in the primary. And some people say, well, that's too bad for them. They should register. Well, I don't want to leave anybody out in the process. I want every Alabamian to have a choice in selecting the nominees of the party that they're closely affiliated with. So it's a very complex situation, and that's why I appointed a committee that will study this in depth and report back to me in 60 days as to the recommendations they have. And that'll be based in a lot on what other states have done. Let's review and consider what other states have done that have been successful. And then we'll come to our own conclusions is the best way to handle it here in Alabama.
I know some people say a lot of times that when you look at parties, Democrat, Republican, that their numbers stay equal, and it's really the independents, that person who, as you say, maybe this election they may vote in the Democratic primary for whatever reason. They may say, oh, I know somebody, I went to school with them, I'm going to vote in the Democratic primary. The next time, oh, I know this person who's running for a Republican probate judge, I'm going to vote in this primary. They don't consistently vote in one primary. How do you go about dealing with the independents, knowing that, as you say, they may go back and forth on which party because they don't identify with one party?
They're the swing voters. They're the ones that really elect our officials, both statewide and nationally and locally. So it's a very touchy subject. You've got to make sure they don't feel like they've been eliminated in this process. That's the reason I don't want to just jump out front and say, yes, we've got to have party registration, and that's it. We've got to take into consideration everyone in Alabama should have a participation in electing the officials in our state. So I don't know what the end result of that's going to be. I think it's going to be somewhere between registration and where we are now. Some states have done various things to, I guess, just say that we're going to run this effectively for our party, but also have access to other people that can come into our party and make decisions to help us vote. But, you know, the one thing that we don't want, and that's Democrats coming into our primary for the purpose of picking our nominee so that they can come in the fall and vote against them. Now, that's some things that have happened in the past. There's some instances around the state this past year in some local elections where a Democrat, previous Democrat, would get in the election with a Republican and get a lot of the Democrat vote in the runoff. They would get in the runoff, and then at that point, Democrats came out in large numbers to vote for the Democrat that was in the Republican primary, and the Democrat won. And that leaves the Republican like, what happened here, you know? And so that's the kind of things we're going to be studying in each of these races, and that'll be part of the analysis we'll have to review what's the best step for Alabama going forward.